Oh, you're too kind. Well, hello and welcome, Verso kiddos and those watching later at home, to the debut of the Verso Book Club. And what is the Verso Book Club? It's a reading group engaging in discourse and discussion on new and classic books, focusing on contemporary popular music, media and culture, filmmaking, and artistic scenes. The Verso Book Club provides a forum for author talks on influence, craft, process, and approach. Author talks are recorded, archived, and promoted via the state-of-the-art Verso Studios. So yes, you can share this video with your friends at a later date, hopefully pretty soon. Tonight we have Howard Fishman, who is a frequent contributor to The New Yorker. He has published many essays on music, film, theater, literature, travel, and culture. His writing has also appeared in the New York Times, Rolling Stone, the Telegraph, Vanity Fair, the Washington Post, Artforum, San Francisco Chronicle, Mojo, The Village Voice, Jazziz, and Salmagundi. His play, A Star Has Burnt My Eye, was a New York Times critic's pick. As a performing songwriter and bandleader, Fishman has toured internationally as a headlining artist for over 2 decades. He has released 11 albums to date and is the producer of the album Connie's Piano Songs, the Art Songs of Elizabeth Connie Converse. He is based in Brooklyn, New York. Please welcome Howard Fishman. And right, for those of you who don't know me, I'm the marketing manager of Verso Studios. My name is Brendan Toller. Besides that, I've been a filmmaker, a musician, so I am very excited to talk to Howard about this book, which we have here tonight. He'll sign it. It's available for purchase to anyone who ever asks. And I just finished it this morning, so yes, I did read the book. Howard, I like to start off with, because I'm always reading him because I subscribe to his Substack and I'm a huge fan, but a Greil Marcus quote. And he says, "History without myth is surely a wasteland, but myths are compelling only when they are at odds with history." Talk about Connie Converse in that context, because she's a new artist for many of us, and she is at odds with what we know of musical history.
That's true. I first heard Connie Converse in 2010. I was at a holiday party, and I was minding my own business when a song came up that froze me in my tracks. And I usually like to start these talks by just playing that song. So if that's okay, let's cue Talking Like You.
Don't see why they call it lonesome. I'm never lonesome when I go there. See that bird sitting on my windowsill, well, he's saying whippoorwill all the night through. See that brook running by my kitchen door, well, it couldn't talk no more if it was you. Up that tree there's sort of a squirrel thing, sounds just like we did when we were quarreling. In the yard I keep a pig or two, they drop in for dinner like you used to do. I don't stand in the need of company, with everything I see talking like you. Up that tree there's sort of a squirrel thing, sounds just like we did when we were quarreling. You may think you left me all alone, but I can hear you talk without a telephone. I don't stand in the need of company, with everything I see talking like you. See that bird sitting on my windowsill, well, he's saying whippoorwill all the night through, just whippoorwill all the night through. In between two
So after the song played, it was on some kind of a mix, and it went on to some other song by some other artist. But I tracked down the host of the party, and I said, "Who in the world did we just hear?" And he said, "Oh, this is we heard Connie Converse. That's from an album that was just recently released of these recordings that she made in the 1950s. But she never really made it, and one day she drove away and disappeared and was never heard of again. And the recordings were found decades later, and they were just put out recently on a little Brooklyn label." So I went home that night, and on my way home, I stopped off at a local record store, and I bought the album, which is called How Sad, How Lovely. And I started listening to the songs. And in that song that we just heard, what I hear is early American like country blues. I hear early American pop. I hear some jazz influences. I hear early hillbilly music. But it's none of those things. And as somebody who has spent a lot of their life investigating those kinds of music, especially music from the 20s, 30s, and 40s, I couldn't believe that I didn't know who Connie Converse was, that I had never heard of this person. And as I listened to the album that night, my first suspicion was that this was a hoax, that this was somebody today who was writing this music, because there's no way that music that was this good could have been ignored as the liner notes had it, the liner notes to the album in the 1950s. We would all know about her. So the Grail Marcus quote is in there in the beginning of the book because there is kind of a myth around Connie Converse, one that I tried to dispel a little bit in the book, but the myth of her is at odds with musical history, because musical history has it that people were not writing personal, introspective, witty songs from a first-person narrative until Bob Dylan and company came along in the early 60s. And Connie Converse seems to have rewritten that narrative, or the discovery of her music seems to have rewritten that narrative. I'm sorry, that's a very long answer to a very short question.
It's a very good setup. Widen the lens and the frame a little bit. Talk about her resurgence, how interest even grew for this music to be reissued through Dan DeZula, I think his name is, and WNYC. Talk about that story a little bit.
Yeah, that word is always so funny to me. Resurgence in the piece that I wrote for the Times a few months ago, around the time of the album, the book coming out. The tagline for the essay, which I did not write, said there's been a resurgence of interest in Connie Converse. A resurgence implies a surgence, which there never was. There was never anything about Connie Converse until recently. So it's really a discovery of her that has happened recently. And it's only happened by the most miraculous of circumstances. These recordings, as I say, were made in the 1950s, but she never had a public appearance and she never made a record of her own. So the recordings that existed of her were recordings that either she made in her apartment using a big, clunky, old reel-to-reel tape recorder. Not old at the time. It was brand new at the time. It was cutting-edge technology. Or they were recordings that were made of her in concert in people's homes. One of the people that recorded her in his home was a guy named Gene Deitch, who was an animator and an illustrator. And in 2004, Gene Deitch was invited onto the WNYC radio show Spinning on Air, hosted by David Garland. And David Garland knew that Gene Deitch had this history of recording people that came to his home for house concerts that he organized. And he said, "Hey, Gene, why don't you bring some of your favorite old home recordings and we'll play them as part of the show. It'll be fun." One of the songs that Gene Deitch brought that day was a Connie Converse song. And as the song played, a guy by the name of Dan DeZula was driving down the New Jersey Turnpike, pulled his car over the side of the road because he couldn't believe, like me, what he was listening to, and wrote down the name Connie Converse on the back of his vehicle registration so that he would remember it when he got home. And like me, when he got home, he got on Google, he looked up Connie Converse, and he found there's nothing there. There's nothing about this person. It was almost like she didn't exist. There were no concert appearances, no reviews of anything that she'd ever done, no albums, no photographs of her, only things that were associated with this, period. There was nothing about her. Dan DeZula then, over the course of time, contacted the radio station, who contacted Gene Deitch, who contacted Connie Converse's brother, Phil Converse, who had all of her original recordings. And DeZula then created a record label for the express purpose of introducing Connie Converse to the world. So that is how she was introduced. But from that time, which was in 2009, the album came out, to just very recently when this big tome came out, very little was known about Connie Converse. And one of the reasons that I took on this crazy undertaking was for that very reason. It bothered me. That's an understatement. I was upset by the fact that there was so little known about this person, and it seemed like something needed to be done about that. And so I gave myself the task of tracking down everybody that might have known anything about Connie Converse, might have known her, family members, etc. And in an attempt to create a historical record of who this innovator was.
Who are your writing influences?
My writing influences. Grail Marcus is a good one, for sure. For music, Lester Bangs. I think, though, my writing influences are more people like Joseph Mitchell, Calvin Trillin, Robert Caro, investigative journalistic types of writers.
Sure. You know, quite often when you're starting a project like this, even before pitching, it helps to have some sort of model that's kind of came before. So when I think of Connie, and I said this at dinner, I think of Karen Dalton, I think of Arthur Russell, I think of Peter Logner, these artists who had later mass interest long after, sadly, they were gone. So was there anyone that came to mind while you were kind of starting to think about this book?
The challenge of getting this book published is that nobody had ever heard of Connie Converse before. So publishers didn't want to touch it. And the first version of the book was a standard biography, which this is not. The standard biography, cradle to grave, she went here, she did this, she studied here, blah, 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 was not going to work because there was no hook to get anybody to pick up the book in terms of where the publishers were coming from. So the way that the book is written, I don't necessarily know, I don't have a comp for it. It's a hybrid. You were describing it earlier over dinner. What did you call it?
Investigative travelogue.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely in the book, and I talk about this search for this mysterious person. But it's part biography, but it's also part, investigation, meditation on what it is to be an artist, a personal narrative, and detective story.
And as I understand it, I mean, this really started as a shorter essay that eventually got accepted by The New Yorker, which was your first article there, right? The New Yorker?
Yeah. The way it worked is I already had the idea. I had already started working on the book. And as I say, my initial poking around in the publishing world told me that this was not going to be an easy sell. So one person that I talked to in publishing said, nobody knows who Connie Converse is. You've got to try to place a magazine article about her somewhere and use that as a way to leverage to get a book deal, because that will generate interest in her. And I wrote an essay, and I sent it to somebody who I sort of knew at the New Yorker for advice, just saying, hey, I don't know anything about the publishing world or the magazine world. Where would you suggest I send this? And she said, well, let me read it and I'll get back to you. And then she got back to me and she said, I've sent it to my editor here at the New Yorker and he likes it. And I had my first published piece in the New Yorker. So it's just kind of a wild circumstance.
And what was your trajectory before as a writer?
0.
All right, then. Well, let's just go for the jugular right here. You know, I think a lot of this book is what it's like to be as an artist in America. I mean, that totally resonates. And, you know, what would make an artist, what are the forces that would make them want to disappear?
Connie Converse disappeared several times in her life. She got a full ride scholarship to Mount Holyoke, and then after her second year there, she dropped out for unknown reasons, and her whereabouts for the next 9 months are undocumented. In 1961, she told friends and family that she had gotten tired of New York and that she was going to take a sabbatical to Ann Arbor, Michigan, to visit her brother who was living there. And she ended up never going back to New York or ever telling anybody why she left. So that was her second disappearing act. Her third disappearing act, and her final one, as far as anybody knows, was in 1974 when she wrote friends and family saying, "I'm going to start a new life somewhere, don't come looking for me," and drove off and was never heard from again. What would drive a person to make these kinds of rash decisions? I do, in the book, I do meditate on a lot of the issues that artists face. And I know that because until becoming a writer, I've been a musician for most of my life, and a musician operating outside the mainstream. And I know some of the issues that Connie Converse was up against in a different sort of form. Obviously, she had a much greater struggle because she was a woman that was operating in very much a man's industry in those days. But I think, I don't know, I think one of the things that resonates for people when they understand or they hear the story of Connie Converse, that she disappeared, that she drove away, I think a lot of us have that fantasy from time to time. I mean, it might be really fleeting. It might not be something that we take seriously or meditate on for a long time before putting it into action, as she did. But I think, you know, life can be hard sometimes, and sometimes we have the thought, what would it be like if I just went somewhere else completely different and started all over again?
You mentioned it. What effect do you think playing music has on your writing about music?
Well, I think it has a lot to do with it. I'm not a formally trained musician, but having spent so many years in the trenches, I kind of have an idea of what that life is like. And I also, as a self-taught guitar player and a self-taught composer, I have some idea of what those things are like.
Yeah, I think that there is a kind of shared experience amongst modern musicians that if you're a writer that is just appreciating it as a critic or a fan is a totally different guise and lens than if you actually play it. If you play it, I think you understand more about the camaraderie and, I mean, Connie was mostly making music on her own other than the people that helped record her. So you get started and you reach out to her brother, Phil, because Connie was intentional about her archive. So talk about that.
Yeah, Phil started corresponding with me pretty frequently after I contacted him, both by email and telephone. And then when he realized how serious I was about this mission that I felt that I was on to get more recognition for his sister and her music, he said, "Howard, why don't you just come out here to Ann Arbor? You know, I've got all Connie's stuff. It's out in the garage. It's in a big filing cabinet that she left here." And I said, okay. And sure enough, in his garage was a 5-drawer filing cabinet that was meticulously organized and curated, complete with a 9-page table of contents of what was in every drawer, what was in every folder, in every drawer. And it was her music, hundreds of letters, photographs, artwork, scientific projects, papers, published articles, lectures, an incredible cornucopia of a life's work that she left behind when she vanished.
But Phil threw some of it out.
He did.
Your thoughts on that?
In that 9-page table of contents that she left behind, there are a number of items that have a single line through them, and next to the line it is scrawled the word dumped. And there were a lot of things that were dumped, unfortunately. And Phil is the one that did the dumping. I did talk with him about that, but I don't want to give away too much of the book. And it's sort of something that is sort of saved for later in the book.
Of course. You know, some of you in the audience also may know that Howard is also the author of a very, it's confirmed, viral New York Times piece. Do you remember the title right off the top of your head?
It wasn't my title. I think they called it something like, before Bob Dylan, there was Connie Converse, and then she vanished, or something like that.
Yeah, and you kind of make the case that Connie is one of the first examples of kind of conventional pop music where somebody's being very vulnerable and existential. If you could walk us through that, how you link that to Dylan, how you link that to Joni Mitchell, how you link that to a lot of the music that's going on that people are attracted to today.
Yeah, when Connie Converse was writing, a lot of people look at pictures of Connie Converse and they say a woman cradling an acoustic guitar with an earnest expression on her face, and they say, oh, she is a folk musician. In 1950 or 1949, when Connie Converse first started writing songs, if you were a folk musician, you did not write your own songs. Folk musicians were people that played traditional music, music with no known author, no known composer. It wasn't until Bob Dylan came along and people among his cohort where, for the first time, there was a trend toward, or a new innovation of putting the I in the song, singing from the, and the audience having the understanding that the person singing the song is also who the song is about. Connie Converse was doing that a decade or more before Bob Dylan and company were. So she was an innovator in that way, which is great. The sad thing is that there was no context for it yet. So music industry people didn't have any way to market her, or so they told her.
Yeah, and so much of what popularizes an artist is what's written about them in the mass media. So thank you, Howard, because you're part of that. But also, there's been a number of artists in recent times that have covered her music, and there's tons of YouTube covers, just local up-and-coming musicians covering her songs. So kind of talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, there have been a lot of people that have started citing Connie Converse as an influence. Bands like Big Thief, singers like Angel Olsen, Frankie Cosmos, Jeff Tweedy from Wilco, Chris Thiele. I think I'd like to think it's only a matter of time before she is recognized in a really widespread way for the innovations that she spearheaded in the 50s. But yeah, there's also, as Brendan said, you go on YouTube, there's all kinds of kids just with their guitars playing Connie Converse songs, and it's fantastic to see.
And the book kind of chronicles how she really led this prophetic life. She was ahead of her time, out of her time, and really trudging through her own time. Talk about some of those instances, because it's not just songwriting.
No. The last songwriting project that Connie Converse did was a song cycle about the mythical figure Cassandra. And Phil Converse made sure that he let me know when we first started talking about those songs that he really felt that she saw herself as a Cassandra. And for those of you that are not up on your Greek mythology, Cassandra was given the gift of prophecy, but also the curse that nobody would believe anything that she said. Or, I'm sorry, I take that back. It's not that they wouldn't believe it, it's that they wouldn't understand it. The way that she spoke, the way that she communicated was beyond human speech in a way that made it impossible for people to comprehend the things that she was trying to tell them about the future. And whether Phil is right or not, I think it's safe to say that Connie Converse definitely was a Cassandra. And yes, she was way ahead of the curve in terms of what she was doing with music, but she was also way ahead of the curve in terms of how she saw American culture and American society and American politics. She was writing and lecturing about, as a peace activist in the 60s, she was writing and lecturing about institutional racism in America and writing about critical race theory before that ever really even was a term. Police brutality, community organizing. She was, if she were around today, she'd be really right in the mainstream of cutting edge thought. But back then it was just, people didn't know what she was talking about.
The statistical study of 1,000 melodies.
This is one of many projects that Connie Converse got into. In this project, she selected 1,000 songs and entered them into an analog computer, entering variables for, I think it was 80 different chart positions on the graph in an attempt to analyze in an analog way what do songs have in common? What do successful popular songs have in common? And when I say popular, I don't mean necessarily pop songs, but like songs that have stood the test of time. She was essentially doing what Pandora and Spotify do today, except she was doing it by hand and by ear.
And talk a little bit about her time in Ann Arbor as a peace activist. And just because of what I'm familiar with, I always kind of, when I was reading the book, you bring up Iggy Pop, but I was like, oh, I wonder if she ever ran into the MC5 with all her activism.
Yeah, we were just talking, Brendan and I were talking before the event tonight about, I don't remember if it was Brendan or Jennifer who asked me what I might ask Connie Converse if I ran into her today. And there's so many things that I would ask her, but one of the primary things would be, why did you stop making music? Why didn't you come back to making music? Because she stopped in 1961, frustrated because her music was too ahead of its time. But she didn't disappear until 1974. And during all those years of activism and peace work and rigorous intellectual activity that she was engaged in the 60s, the time by the late 60s, early 70s was definitely ripe for Connie Converse's music to find an audience. And I also have to believe that she was listening to the music that was out there, that she would have heard Bob Dylan and Joni Mitchell and Leonard Cohen and all of the slew of singer-songwriters who came in the early 70s. Like, why didn't she go back to music? It's a mystery.
But, and correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't she at some kind of family gathering and she kind of knew a lot of those songs, Bob Dylan and some of the...
Yeah, according to her nephews, they would have weekly sing-alongs where she would come over to the house and gather around the piano or Connie's guitar. And according to them, she would sing songs by the Beatles and Bob Dylan and Pete Seeger. And so it's I don't have firsthand proof that that was the case, but according to them, it was.
So no even talk of like she had records that she carried in all these places that she moved to, huh?
No talk, sadly. I mean, there are entries in her checkbook for Discount Records, which is where Iggy Pop worked. Exactly. So we know that she bought records, but what they were, we don't know.
There's, kind of a telling and another sad scene towards the end of the book. She's playing Risk with her nephew Tim, and when she plays Risk, she moves all her forces and supplies to Iceland, cut off, can't go anywhere, and she says it's to teach a lesson: don't get caught up in war games.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, this is somebody who, she had a fraught family, fraught time trying to plug into her place in the world. And it's just so beautiful that now there is some celebration on a mass level for her. And even when she has the fraught family connections, she still wants her parents and her brothers to understand her music and what she's doing.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think that anybody who grew up in a household that maybe did not support their artistic vision for themselves or artistic ambitions, I would include myself in that category, knows what that is like and how hard it is to shake those formative kinds of familial forces.
So as I said, this is a kind of an investigative travelogue. What was that like? What was getting leads? What was deciding to get on planes, deciding to get on cars, trusting people? What was that whole process like?
Yeah, the research for this book was all primary source materials, all of it. There was nothing to be found at all about Connie Converse online or in books or anything like that. So it involved a lot of knocking on doors, a lot of making cold calls. And I think somehow I convinced myself that it was all going to work out in terms of being able to complete a project like this book, because the book took me 12 years to research and write. 10 of those years, I did not have a book contract. So I was just going completely on spec and trusting that it would result in something good. But at no point did I have any guarantee that that was the case. So that might have been the hardest thing about it.
I think it's less prevalent in the culture today, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, but there's the art, and then there's the thing that's written about it, what contextualizes it, what places it within history, what places it within society. Are you cognizant of that when you're writing a piece like this, or what do you even think of that setup?
Can you say that again? I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah, I mean, when somebody has an art show, say at the Met or something like that, there's a New Yorker review. Same with a film critic and a movie. With this book, this is laying the narrative of an artist that is being discovered by so many people right now. And what you write and what you include, what you don't include, what you discover, what you don't discover, is kind of setting the legacy and the story of this artist up. I think that that's always tied to how we listen to music, how we consume art.
Well, I just tried to be as fair as I could in the book and just present what the things that I found and let people sort of make up their own minds about it. My book is, I don't think it's an attempt to shape the way that people feel about Connie Converse. I just want everybody to know about her because, as somebody wrote on social media recently, she's a new reference point in music history. I mean, we have to readjust, I feel, our understanding of American musical history in the 20th century because of the discovery of Connie Converse and what she was up to. So, yeah, I feel really happy to be able to be part of that rediscovery or not rediscovery, discovery.
And Howard, I would say that since you heard that song at a party, you've been consumed, because not only was this a book project for you, but you've also done this kind of biographical telling in other formats. So talk about that a little bit. Yeah,
it started with me playing her songs at my own concerts and showing pictures of her and reading from her letters. And that sort of documentary concert format became a play. And through the course of developing that play, I also put out an album of songs that she never recorded. The bit that was mentioned in the bio that Brendan read, this whole other catalog of songs, of art song that she wrote for classical voice and piano. And then there was the New Yorker essay, and now there's this book. So yes, I have been consumed with evangelizing for quite a long time, and as in any form that I can find.
We're going to open it up to you, the audience, to ask questions about anything. It could be about just writing in general, advice. The microphone is right over where Jennifer is, so we can get it on the video recording and everybody can hear it loud and proud. So if anyone wants to get up, please do. All right, thank you.
Hi, I just wanted to understand if you could talk about her influences, her literary and musical influences.
Yes, I can try to talk about that, but I think that she did not talk too much about her musical influences. She was self-taught. She did study violin when she was a child and a little bit of piano, but I think that most of I know that her guitar playing was self-taught. I mean, I hear so many influences in that music, and when we listen to Talking Like You, but I can't say for certain which ones they are because I don't know what records she had, and she didn't write about them. Same goes for her poetry and her lyrics. She didn't talk about the things that were influencing her when she was writing them, but she was an omnivore as a reader. I'm assuming she was an omnivore as a listener as well. And let's see, who were some of the people that she was reading around that time? Faulkner, Fitzgerald, Emily Dickinson, Shakespeare, I'm blanking on all the names. There should be a long list that I have right in my brain, but they're not coming up right now. But she read everything. Looks like we have another question.
In the archives that were found, was there any lyrics that were never put to any of her music?
There were not lyrics that had not been put to music, but there were, she deposited a lot of songs with the Library of Congress. She sent them lead sheets of songs to copyright them. And several of those songs, we don't have any recordings of her singing them. We just have the sheet music. In terms of lyrics, though, I don't think so, no.
Was there any effort by her family or anyone else to try to find her after she was gone?
No.
Did your findings lead you anywhere to where she might have gone?
Well, one thing that I knew when writing the book, thank you for the question. One thing I knew when writing the book is that it was not going to be a true crime book, and I was not going to go looking for her body. My goal with this book was to investigate her as a person and as an artist and as a thinker, not to go chasing after bodies in cars. There is a portion of the book toward the end that is dedicated to the disappearance, to the various things that were said about it by various people, to the contradictory statements that were made by various people, to conversations I had with members of the police and private detectives about their opinions. So it's in there, but it's not the focus of the book. Are people, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, well, I'll let people marinate for a little bit, but, always a good question. Go ahead. Advice for writers.
Advice for writers. In what respect?
Just any advice for writing. It's hard. I mean, You know, you caught a break getting in the New Yorker, and you had great success with the New York Times article, which certainly helped the book. There's thousands that are just going through rejection letters and trying and reading other works. So advice for those who prevail.
Yeah, I guess I would say, as somebody who's received so many of those rejection letters, it is just to keep going. It's just keep doing it and believe in what you're doing, and not make the success be the thing that gets published by the New Yorker or the New York Times, because those things are so rare. The success has to be in the gratification of expressing ourselves the way that we want to, and having people read it.
How has immersing yourself in Connie's music and her world influenced your own music now, and your own songwriting and playing?
Thank you for that question. I always feel funny about talking about my own music in the context of this book, because I really want the focus to be on her. But as I say early on in the book, when I first heard Connie Converse, it was like she was the greatest possible manifestation of what I could ever hope to do as a songwriter. So if anything, it was more an affirmation, like, okay, I can keep writing the kinds of songs that I want, that don't fit into particular genres, that aren't marketable, that are quirky, that are personal, and that's okay.
Thanks.
Will there be further Connie Converse projects?
Well, there may well be. I would like to think that other people will take the baton and do some things with Connie Converse's music and with her story. For me personally, I don't know. I mean, I haven't really stopped. I haven't let this book go yet. I'm still, reaching out to people who, if I get a lead or have an idea about somebody else that might have known her, I'm still trying.
Yes, and there are a couple of, film adaptations knocking at your door, you've told me.
Yeah, I do have a film and TV agent who's been fielding requests, and it does seem that there are a lot of people that are interested in this story, adapting this story for other medium.
Go ahead, Nat, yeah.
Thank you guys for doing this, by the way.
Thanks for being here.
Who would be your the actress that you would like to see play her?
It's funny because when I wrote my play about Connie Converse, I struggled with the frame of the play a bit, because I didn't want anybody playing her. I didn't want to see Connie Converse on stage. Because there's no film of her, because she disappeared, because she's sort of this ghostly figure, I never wanted to see her manifested in the form of an actor on stage. So she was not in my play, even though the play was about her. I know that I won't be able to have that sort of control when it comes to adapting her story for film or television or whatever it is. I just hope that it's somebody good, and that they don't make her into some stupid caricature. But I don't have an actor in mind. I think I would want maybe somebody who was an unknown, so that there were no other frames of reference when we see her on screen.
Can you talk about the play, please, and where and if it was produced?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thanks for asking. The play had its world premiere at BAM, at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, as part of the Next Wave Festival in 2016. And we then took it on the road in the Northeast. And it went through, 2 or 3 years of development before that. We had a trial run at the Brick Theater in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. We did a workshop up in Dartmouth, and it's called "A Star Has Burnt My Eye."
I'll do one last question. The book is dedicated to those who ask.
Yeah. The original dedication said something like, to anyone who's ever felt unknown, unseen, or unheard. And to anyone who ever asks. And I don't know, the first part of it felt, the more that I thought about it, it felt a little trite, or not trite, but a little cliche. But I liked the ring of "to those who ask," to the ones who ask. I think that's what the final one said. Connie Converse didn't want, how do I want to say this? One of the things that I love about her most, as far as I know her, is her intense curiosity about everything. The idea of having a moment of boredom, I think, would be alien to her. She was interested all the time. She wanted to know about everything. And unlike somebody like Bob Dylan, who was very canny about making himself known and playing the games that needed to be played in order to get ahead in the music business, Connie Converse didn't play any of those games. She wanted people to come to her. She wanted to be discovered on her own terms. And obviously she was not, or has not been until now. But the idea that there's a lot there at any given moment if we're just paying attention. And if we're just curious enough, there's a lot that will be revealed, but we have to be present and pay attention and look for it. So I think that's what the dedication is about.
Beautiful. Howard will be back there signing some books with Jennifer, coordinating sales. So thank you again for coming to the debut Verso Book Club event, and hope to see you guys soon.
Thanks for being here.